I filled this out sort of completely randomly. This is a work of fiction. I just picked some random details. I kind of developed a storyline in my head and put it down and filled in as I went along. So we're going to make this up as we go along is essentially what we're doing. Now in your essay, obviously you're going to be using the actual facts and things that happened in your life. So your process is going to be slightly different because you're going to be drawing on actual memories instead of, coming up with stuff out of whole cloth. But other than that, the process is going to be the same. So I'm going to just start a new document. We're starting with a blank document, and I'm going to put my screen on 2 pages so that we can have the outline on one side and the document on the other side. So that it all fits on one page. Oh my goodness, everything in the world is going off, like every kind of notification and noise. That's not working. So what we're going to do today is we are going to take this sample outline and we're going to turn it into a draft of a paper. I'm not doing the APA part yet, so we don't have a title page, we don't have a header, we don't have a title, but we're just going to start writing, okay? I'm going to start over here. You can see on the sample personal essay development form, what I've done is I've put in an attention getter. Can you believe I'm finally an art teacher? And then what I have over here in the comment are a few alternate suggestions. There are different ways that you can start your essay. So you could start with something kind of intriguing, like after years, I'm finally doing my dream job, maybe, right? And that maybe makes it kind of interesting because now we want to know what happens or whether it happens. You could do something very descriptive, and you could set the scene, right, in a way that is interesting or that makes somebody want to read more and find out how is this happening? Why is this happening? And you could, you can use some dialogue. You could use a quote or something that gets, the audience right into the middle of the story, right at the beginning. In this case, this is kind of the end of the story. So I did just share a link to a YouTube video that has some information about writing an attention getter if this is something that you struggle with. Okay, so I wanted to start with those resources. But for right now, I'm just going to use this one, which is, not the best attention getter out there, but it will work. I will say this, typically in this essay, we want to avoid second person point of view. We don't want to be saying you or your throughout the essay. We want to focus on the situation from our own perspective. So it's I, me, my, okay? Now I'm going to give you a little caveat and say that in your attention getter, if you're asking the audience a question, that would probably be the only time that it's acceptable to use you in an essay like this, okay? So just keep that in mind. I am using you here, and typically that is a big no-no, but because this is an attention getter, because I'm trying to draw the reader in, I am going to use it in this one sentence, and I won't use it again in the entire paper. So we're going to start just by copying in the things that I put in the beginning of my outline. I started out with the attention getter. I'm going to copy in my background information, and then I'm going to copy in my thesis. And now this is not going to work. I can't just copy and paste and say, ta-da, there's my introduction. Obviously, that isn't going to work. So we have to do a little bit of work to get it there. So what do we need to do? We're going to add some detail. And we're going to make sure that all of our sentences are complete sentences in some kind of grammatical order. This is a rough draft, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but the more work that you do on the front end, the less work you have to do later. So keep that in mind as you work. Can you believe I'm finally an art teacher? I didn't finish high school, went into retail. I didn't finish high school. Instead, I went into retail And let's combine these sentences, and worked as a cashier for years. Let's add some more detail. Where was I a cashier? I was a cashier at a local department store for years. Can you believe I'm finally an art teacher? I didn't finish high school. Instead, I went into retail. Can you believe I'm finally an art teacher? I think we need like a transition here, something to get us from this statement to this statement. It feels like a big jump, and I need to help my audience get there. How about I can barely believe it myself? And that connects this question to the why of why you can barely connect it, or why you can barely believe it. I can barely believe it myself. I didn't finish high school. Instead, I went into retail after graduating and worked as a cashier at a local department store for years. I always loved art. Remember, we want to make sure we're using complete sentences. I always loved art, but hated school. I don't know. I feel like this is a big jump too. What does having worked at a department store for years have to do with I always loved art? We need to help our audience understand how those things are connected. Does it feel like a strong connection? Just do like a thumbs up if you think it is, or if you think it needs some work. So I think that it needs some work. Instead, I went into retail after graduating and worked as a cashier at a local department store for years, even getting a promotion. However, I wasn't very happy even after being promoted to customer service manager. Okay, so now we have a little bit more context. So we've got the background, worked as a cashier, even got a promotion. However, that's a transition word, and it signals like contradiction or conflict, right? However, I wasn't very happy even after being promoted to customer service manager. I always loved art, but hated school. I don't know. I don't think we need the hated school part in here. I think we'll be able to talk about that later. So let's take that out for now. I had always loved art and wanted to be an art teacher, but found myself stuck. That's not a very professional word, but found myself let's go with stuck for now, because I don't want to waste a lot of time. This is a rough draft. I can fix it later, okay? But found myself stuck in my retail job as I got married, had kids, and lived my everyday life. Okay, so let's go back to art and art teacher for 1 second and say, I had given up on being an art teacher years ago. So this says finally decided to face my fears. I think that I need to say that a little bit differently, right? I had given up on being an art teacher years ago until I was forced to rethink my career choice a few years ago. Looking for multiple solutions and using logic instead of emotion. Here's our critical thinking, because remember, our thesis statement has to include critical thinking. Looking for multiple solutions and using logic instead of emotion led me to go back to school after years as a cashier, and I finally reached my goal of becoming an art teacher in elementary school. in an elementary school. That makes a little more sense. So how does this look? I don't. So we have our introduction. It seems like it flows pretty well. We've got the attention getter at the beginning. That's our first sentence. And then we have some background information that sort of provides the context, right? Like, how did we get here? What is happening in the backstory? What's the context? Who are the people involved? And then we have our thesis statement, which is the last sentence of our introduction. The thesis statement is the umbrella over the content. So everything that we're going to write about needs to fit under this umbrella, which is why I'm specifically mentioning the critical thinking characteristics that I'm going to talk about. And I'm specifically mentioning going back to school and becoming an art teacher, because that's really the crux, that's the framework of the whole essay. So those two things need to be in the thesis statement. And the thesis then leads us to the rest of the essay. So we'll start here with body paragraph 1, the beginning of the action or the story. And I'm going to do exactly what I did earlier. I'm just going to copy in the details. Just going to copy in the details, and then I'm going to take these 3 sentences and I'm going to turn them into an entire paragraph by just adding in detail. We're making sure that our sentences are complete. So I gave up on high school, for example, and we are looking for places where we can flesh out the story and provide more detail, right? So why did we give up after high school? Right? Like how was I feeling when that happened? Sorry, I'm just seeing in the chat, it says in the intro, the 3rd sentence says you didn't finish high school. Oh, it does say I didn't finish high school. All right, well, let's go and fix it. Let's say, because the details are not about getting a GED, and this is fiction, so I can go back and change the facts. How about I barely finished high school? And that works a little bit better. Thank you for pointing out the discrepancy there, Brittany. I appreciate that. All right. I gave up on school after high school, never went to my graduation, got a job working in retail, got married and had kids, life goes on. So let's flesh this out with details, okay? I gave up on school after, let's say after my senior year. And then we'll join this together and we'll say, I never even went to my graduation. I was too busy having fun with my friends. We all got an apartment at the beach that summer, and I never wanted to see another textbook again as long as I lived. Okay, so some good detail, right? Some good emotion, storytelling, something people can relate to, right? My friends all got jobs at the beach. I wasn't good at swimming, and I didn't like kids, so I found a job as a cashier in a department store not far away from the apartment. From the apartment. So I'm just adding in random details, okay? I'm just trying to connect the ideas and flesh it out and sort of create this storyline that happened, right? We all got an apartment at the beach. I never wanted to go back to school. Had to get a job. What kind of job? Well, I don't like to swim. I didn't want to work in the concessions or I didn't want to work at, as a ride attendant. So I went to a department store and I got a job as a cashier. So we've already said this, so I can take that out. I feel like I found a job as a cashier in a department store, not far away from the apartment. We're still talking about that first summer after graduation. And then we have a big gap between that and got married and had kids, right? That feels like a big jump. How did we get there? What happened during those years? We really need to give our audience something there, okay? So let's say I worked my way up over the next couple of years, and now and ended up, I don't know, or I liked the job. Let's do this. Sometimes you have to go back and rethink it, right? That's just part of the drafting process. Sometimes the first thing you write is not a good thing. It just doesn't work. So how about I liked my job, okay, right? I don't love it, but I liked it okay. And because I was good at it, I ended up staying there for several years, right? So now we've bridged that time gap. Got married and had kids. I eventually, right, didn't happen right away. I eventually got married and had kids. Life goes on. All right. I ended up staying there for several years. I don't need this, got married and had kids. Life goes on. Okay. So now we've got the beginning of the action or the story. This is kind of the beginning. And we really could go back and add more details here if you wanted to. You could say we all got an apartment at the beach. I never wanted to see another textbook. It was an awesome summer. Awesome summer. We got to play at being grown-ups for the first time, buying our own groceries and decorating our new space. I loved it. My friends all got jobs at the beach, but I wasn't good at swimming and I didn't like kids. So I found a job as a cashier in a department store not far away from the apartment. I only had to, it wasn't swimming, it wasn't lifeguarding, and there weren't many kids. So I was thrilled with it at first. Okay, so I was thrilled with it at first. I liked my job. Let's just go that, because I already just said I was thrilled with it at first. Because I was good at it, I ended up staying there for several years. I eventually got married and had kids, life goes on. Okay. So that's what I mean. Part of the drafting process is going back and taking a look at it and reading through, making sure that one idea connects to the next idea. Sometimes you have to use transitional words. Sometimes you're saying the same thing twice and you don't need to do that. Sometimes you want to add in more details and flesh it out and make it feel more vivid, right? More realistic by putting in more description or more explanation. So the second body paragraph over here. So the details in the outline are kind of sketchy, right? It just says, I lost my job when I had to miss work because my kids were sick. Kid was sick. I realized I needed a career instead of a job. I wanted to work somewhere that would value my talents. I thought about going to school, but it was scary and I didn't really want to go. So I'm just going to copy these in. Let's just put them in here. Now, this is working for me because I'm pretty happy with the order of organization on my outline. You may not be. You may find that once you go from here to here, that it doesn't flow the way you wanted it to. And it's okay at this stage to rearrange a little bit. Don't go completely off on a tangent, but you can rearrange things or kind of shift and adjust a little bit if you need to at this stage. So I lost my job when I had to miss work. I feel like we need a little bit more backstory between life goes on and I lost my job, right? We need to kind of set the stage. This is a narrative. We need to tell the story, okay? I had been working as a customer service manager for several years when my daughter got sick. It was a terrible time, and the whole family was worried about her. I had to take quite a bit of time off from work to stay with her in a hospital far away. And because I didn't have short-term disability insurance benefits, let's go with benefits, I lost my job. Okay, so now instead of I lost my job because my kids were sick, now we have a whole story about what happened, right? I had been working there for years. It was my daughter that got sick. We're giving more detail. We're drilling down into the facts of the situation, okay? It was a terrible time, right? Use your emotions, set the stage, get your audience interested. The whole family was worried about her. I had to take quite a bit of time off from work. You don't want to say, I had to take lots. I had to take lots of, okay? You could say that, but remember that this is an academic essay and we want to try to be as professional as we can be, as long as it makes sense. We don't need super long convoluted sentences using lots and lots of big words, but if you're using a word and you could easily use something a little more professional, you could say, I had to take a lot, even is better than lots, right? I had to take a lot of time off from work, or even be more specific. I had to take several weeks off from work to stay with her in a hospital far away. And because I didn't have short-term disability benefits, I lost my job. How would that make you feel? And in that moment, right? We're telling a narrative. This is a story. I was devastated and angry, right? And angry. I realized I needed a career. I think this works right there. I don't need anything else from here to here. I wanted to work somewhere that would value my talents. And that leads me, right? This looks like a great way to lead into the idea of being an art teacher. This, which made me think about being an art teacher. The dream I had given up on all those years ago. Okay, so we're just adding layers of detail. We're just fleshing the ideas out. We're starting with one single line, right? I wanted to work somewhere that would value my talents, and then we're developing and we're developing and we're developing from there. We're just adding more things to it. I wanted to work somewhere that would value my talents, which made me think about being an art teacher, the dream I had given up all those years ago. I thought about going back to school, but it was scary and I didn't really want to go. Maybe we could say, instead of it was scary, we could say, but it caused me a lot of anxiety and I really didn't want to go. I hadn't liked school to begin with, ever. I hadn't liked school back then, and I doubted I would like it now. Okay. So again, this is a draft. We're going to keep working on it later. We may not love what we're saying, but we're going to put it on paper and we're going to come back to it. So we're just going to keep moving. The next paragraph, our details over here. This is where we start getting into the critical thinking piece of this essay, okay? So my husband convinced me to think logically instead of emotionally. That's one of the critical thinking traits. If you think about the list of characteristics and behaviors of a good critical thinker, right? Consider controversial topics logically, not emotionally. This is maybe not controversial, but the idea of thinking logically, not emotionally is certainly one that applies in this situation, okay? So that's the first piece. The next piece is talking about considering multiple solutions and how that plays a role. So we're going to put that in there, and then we're going to wrap it up with the outcome. This is how it worked out. So if we look back here, we've got logically, not emotionally, and we have looking for multiple solutions. Okay. So now we just need to put some details in because this is not a long enough paragraph. It doesn't work as is. We have to flesh it out. My husband convinced me to think logically instead of emotionally. About school. About my experiences at school. And I realized I would survive. About my experiences in high school. And I realized I would survive going back to college. I don't like using the word school back to back in that sentence twice. So I'm picking different words, high school and college. Those are, instead of saying school twice, I'm kind of breaking that up a little bit. I would survive going back to college. When I stopped getting emotional, I was able to think rationally about the situation, because we want to talk more about this critical thinking and how did it really impact me, right? If I had kept thinking emotionally, I would never have gone back to school. So I want to think rationally about it. If I was able to think rationally about the situation, I recognized that I was not the same person that I had been back then. The older me would not be so impatient and already knew how to juggle multiple responsibilities. School couldn't be as bad as I remembered it. Okay, so now I've fleshed out the idea of using logic and not emotion. I've given some details and some examples of how I started to think more logically instead of thinking emotionally, which was my initial reaction. So I'm giving examples to illustrate how the critical thinking really played a role. I'm not just mentioning it in passing and then moving on to the story. I'm really focusing in to make sure that I'm talking about these critical thinking characteristics. The next one is about multiple solutions. But I think I need a bridge here. I think I need to connect these ideas a little bit more, because up here, I'm just thinking about going to school. And now in this sentence, I've done it and I'm figuring out how to juggle it all. So I need a bridge. I need an explanation of how I got from here to here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, making the decision to go back wasn't easy, but actually figuring out how to make it work was even harder. Now I've got a transition between the decision making and the actual action, right? So that sentence acts to bridge the gap. It was a lot to juggle. I feel like I already said juggle here. So I don't want to use juggle twice back to back because that's going to stand out. So let's see. Instead of just saying it was a lot to juggle, this is a great opportunity to add some detail. I needed to find a way to pay for my classes. I needed to get a part-time job since I wasn't working full-time anymore. And I needed to still take care of my house and my kids. Right there. I had a lot to juggle, just became an entire sentence with 4 examples of the things that we're juggling. That's a good way to add detail. I considered multiple solutions and found a way to make it all work. So I like this because this is one of those critical thinking characteristics, but let's be even more explicit and let's really identify that. So let's just say, luckily, I had learned some critical thinking skills that could help. I considered multiple solutions and found several ways, several different ways to make it all work. Now here again, several different ways sounds like a great opportunity to add detail. What ways? What were the several different ways? So let's put some of that stuff in there. What would we do to make this work? I took let's see. The first thing in my list was that I had to pay for classes. So I applied for scholarships. I got a job door dashing. I enlisted the help of my extended family, right? That's what you would do, is you would ask your aunts and uncles and cousins and in-laws to watch your kids, right? I enlisted the help of my extended family to keep my kids well taken care of when I was in class. There's, again, another good sentence with 3 different examples, lots of detail, and it all stems from this phrase, several different ways to make it work. So this is a second example here of how we are using critical thinking to find multiple solutions, right? We're not just mentioning it in one sentence and then moving on. We have really given some explanation of how this made an impact. And then I kind of like this sentence right here, just the way it is. It wasn't easy, but this past May I graduated with my art degree. Let's just be specific. Over the summer, I found a job at a local elementary school. I start next week. Okay, so that's my story. I think that this acts as the body, the beginning, the middle, and then the end, right? We have a conflict, something happens, I lost my job, I had to find a solution, decided to go back to school. How did critical thinking help me do that, right? Looking for multiple solutions and thinking rationally. So I've clearly identified those characteristics that had an impact on me. And the last thing I have to do is develop a conclusion, and then we'll be done. So very quickly, I'm just going to copy in my elements from my outline. I'm going to use those as a framework, right? As a base. Start with this and just develop. So after years and years of giving up on my dreams, because I never thought I'd reach them, I finally made it. Okay. I had to use a lot of critical thinking, but it worked out. I like this, but I think that there's another opportunity here to identify which critical thinking characteristics. I had to use a lot of critical thinking, like how do I want to do this? I had to use, let's say I would never have done it without critical thinking. I had to think rationally before I could get over my negative emotions regarding school. And with so many responsibilities, I could never have been successful if I hadn't learned to look for multiple solutions. I know this is not pretty, guys, as I'm thinking and typing at the same time, but this is it. Like I'm not working from a script here. I'm just trying to figure it out as I go. So this is my process. Let's see. And with so many responsibilities, I could never have been successful if I hadn't learned to look for multiple solutions. These skills quite literally changed my life. And now I can't wait to start my new career. Okay. And I think that's it. I would say maybe we need to develop this conclusion a little bit more, but that's part of the joy of this being a draft, is that this is rough and there will definitely be time later to come back to it and make more edits, revise it, add more things in. At this stage, what we want is to have a cohesive story that works from beginning to end. It needs to be double spaced, so I'm going to change the spacing on this. Just because I want to know how close we are. It's supposed to be 2 to 3 pages. So we really do need to develop a little bit more, but not very much. I think this is a great first draft. We'll also be adding in our title, our header and our title at the top, and that'll bump it down a little bit. But this is a good place to start. So we have just started with the bare bones of our outline. Some places we didn't even have complete sentences. We copied that over. We just followed it right down through the outline. We fleshed it out, added detail, made sure that there were connections to lead the reader from one idea to the next. There may still be places in here where I need more detail or I need to elaborate more on something, but we'll have an opportunity to catch that in the next step of the process, which is when we go from the rough draft to the final draft. So how did that go? What did you guys think about that?